Then on Sports Central, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the 2022 Music City Bowl matchup between the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Kentucky Wildcats. A game that's got a chance to be a brutally low-scoring game when you consider all the factors here. Iowa's already a team that's been just terrible in offense this season, and both of their top quarterbacks are out. Spencer Petras is out with an injury for the rest of the season. Alex Padilla is in the transfer portal. They're relying on their third-string quarterback, and they're taking on a Kentucky team that's without their starting quarterback, Will Levis, and their top running back, Chris Rodriguez. Both offenses have already been bad this season. Both defenses have been great this season. This has the makings to be a brutally low-scoring game, and for that reason, it's an interesting matchup. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today, starting with your team trends. Iowa lost to Nebraska to finish out the regular season 17-24. A brutal loss there for Iowa. This was a team that went into that matchup winning 4 straight. All they had to do was win that game, and they're probably in the Big Ten championship game. They would have won the Big Ten West, but in the end, they took a loss there, and they finished out the regular season at 7-5. So a brutal loss there. But for Kentucky, they beat Louisville, so they got up to 7 wins to finish out the regular season. They beat the Cardinals 26-13 there, so a good win to finish out the regular season for them. But Kentucky's been a team that has been very inconsistent down the stretch. They did lose to Vanderbilt back on November 12th. That is a team that you do not want to lose to if you're in the SEC. And they also, of course, faced off against Georgia and Tennessee, 2 national contenders. Lost to both of them, but they did put up a pretty good fight against Georgia when they played them back on November 19th. But either way, both teams 7-5 heading into this matchup. Games be on Saturday, December 31st. New Year's Eve in Nashville, Tennessee. Your kickoff is noon Eastern. Spreads going with Iowa by 2. Over-under is 31 for this game. I mean, you're never going to see a line that low for the over-under, but it's 31 for this one, and that's what we saw out of many Big Ten West games this season, many low-scoring matchups, just because the Big Ten West was just filled with bad offenses and decent defenses. And in this matchup, I mean, it's a similar story. And you look at Kentucky, a team that's been fairly good on defense this season, but the offense has disappointed a bit. And it makes sense why the over-under is 31. I mean, it might surprise you at first seeing a line that low for the over-under, but, I mean, it totally makes sense for it to be 31 for this matchup. FBI is going with Kentucky 50% or 50.6%, so they're barely favored in this matchup over Iowa, pretty much as close as you can get. Series history, Kentucky leads at 1-0. That game was back in January. We did see both teams face off against each other on a bowl game, which was on New Year's Day. I think it was the Citrus Bowl. Kentucky did win that game. So we've seen these two teams play each other only once. That was last bowl season. So this is a rematch of that bowl game that we saw last year. But this time around, you got two teams that have been much worse this season. I mean, both teams are 7-5, which isn't terrible, but at least Iowa won the Big Ten West last year, and Kentucky was a team that was actually a decent contender for a good chunk of the season. I mean, this time around, you just got a whole bunch of players missing, and this game has potential to be a mess. Stat comparison, Iowa's 118th in points per game, 6th in points allowed, so a strong defensive team here in Iowa. They allow 14 points a game, which is actually pretty impressive, but offensively, they're only getting 17 points a game. That is just terrible out of a Power 5 program. They're 121st in passers a game, 119th in rush yards. So, I mean, last season, at least they had Tyler Goodson in the backfield to give them something to rely on, someone to rely on, especially when the quarterback situation was as bad as it was last season, and it still was this season. I mean, Spencer Petras is just a bad quarterback. And, I mean, when you got Alex Padilla, who is behind him, he did play for a good chunk against Nebraska, as Spencer Petras did get injured. I mean, Alex Padilla is not much better. So it's just been a mess for the Hawkeyes in the quarterback situation. And it looks like that is going to improve going into next season. They got Cade McNamara coming in from Michigan, so things are looking up for Iowa, but it has been just terrible at the quarterback position and really in general on the offense for the Hawks the past few years. But then for yards allowed, they are 12th in pass defense, 16th in rush defense. At least there's one constant. Iowa's got a solid defense. As for Kentucky, they're 101st in points per game, 17th in points allowed, 97th in passers a game, 95th in rush yards. So offensively, this team just hasn't been very good. They're averaging 22 points a game. They're allowing 19 on average. And I mean, you got Will Levis, who is expected to be a first-round draft pick. He's probably going to get drafted pretty early, but he really hasn't been extremely impressive this season statistically. 2,400 yards, 19 touchdowns, over 10 picks. I mean, his passing stats at least aren't terribly impressive, but he does have tremendous potential into the future, so it makes sense why he's such a sought-after prospect at quarterback. But yeah, he's out of this game. Doesn't really matter either way, as he has declared for the NFL draft. But defensively, Kentucky is a strong team in the pass defense, but the rush defense, that has been somewhat of a weak spot for Kentucky. They're allowing an average of 145 rush yards a game. So, I mean, if you look at both sides here, both teams are not very good on offense. You could say Kentucky is slightly better if you're looking at the offenses here and comparing them. But defensively, I would say Iowa is the better team. They are just a more balanced team in passing defense and rushing defense. I mean, Kentucky is a strong team in the pass defense and the defensive secondary, but when it comes to rush defense, they're not quite as good. 70th in the country there. Recent matchups, Iowa, they lost to Nebraska 17-24, but once again, they did play pretty well down the stretch. They beat Minnesota 13-10, beat Wisconsin 24-10, took care of Purdue 24-3. Turns out the Boilermakers ended up winning the division. They represented the West in the Big Ten title game. And Iowa also beat Northwestern 33-13. I think 33 points was the most points that Iowa scored all season. I mean, this team, they did improve over the season, I would say. I mean, if you look at the first few games of the season, this was a team that played South Dakota State back in week 1. The final score is 7-3. I mean, that just is a sign of what was to come for Iowa when you're only able to put up 7 points on South Dakota State. And the funny thing is, yeah, those 7 points, it wasn't a touchdown. It was 2 safeties and a field goal. I mean, it's just pretty insane how terrible this Iowa offense has been. That was the story last season. This team would have been a national contender last year if the offense was just better. That's the simple way to put it, and it's very true. But for Kentucky, they beat Louisville 26-13. A solid win there over a ranked opponent. They lost to Georgia 6-16, but I was impressed by how they played up against Georgia. They lost to Vanderbilt 21-24. That's a team that you just can't lose to if you're in the SEC. So a terrible loss there. They did beat Missouri 21-17, and that was after losing to Tennessee on the road 6-44. That was when Tennessee was hot. They were coming off of their Alabama win. I mean, that was a tough loss there on the road, 44-6. Your key points for this one: Iowa 7-5. Hawks generally improved down the stretch until the Nebraska game. I mean, they just came out flat in that one. But offensively, this team is terrible. Defensively, they're pretty strong. I mean, that's how it was last year as well. But the offense, I mean, this is a really similar Iowa team to last year, except the offense is even worse. I mean, when you look at this offense last year, I mean, it was bad already. It only got worse in 2022, and that's why Iowa's just been just a terrible team to watch. It's tough to watch the Hawkeyes because of just how brutal this offense is. But Spencer Petras, Alex Padilla, both out. So it looks like the quarterback situation is up for grabs. There's a couple different guys that could be starting for Iowa. I mean, you got true freshman Carson May, who's in there. You got redshirt freshman Joe Labus, who could be playing as well. So we'll see. I'm assuming it's going to be the redshirt freshman, but we'll see what happens in that quarterback situation for Iowa. But for Kentucky, without Will Levis, I mean, it's kind of uncertain as well. I mean, you got Kaya Sharon, who's played a little bit this season. Destin Wade is true freshman. He could be the starter as well, so we'll see what happens. But either way, both teams without their starting quarterbacks. Iowa's without 2 of their top quarterbacks. For Kentucky, you might think, oh, this team can just lean on Chris Rodriguez. He's a great running back in the backfield. Nope, he's also out. He is headed to the NFL draft, and he's not going to be in this game either. So Kentucky's without their starting quarterback, Will Levis. They're without Chris Rodriguez. They're going to be leaning on a young quarterback. Both teams leaning on young quarterbacks. Both offenses have already been terrible this season. Both defenses have been great this season. This has all the makings to be an absolutely terrible football game. Or honestly, I should just say just a brutal football game. It's going to be low scoring, defensive. I mean, this could be a rough one. And that's it. Let's get the prediction here for Iowa and Kentucky. Coming up here in the Music City Bowl, I'm going with the Hawkeyes to win this one 13-6. Here's my predicted final score. I'm going with the Hawks to win this one by a touchdown. I mean, you never know. Iowa might just score a bunch of field goals, get a couple of safeties, and call it good. I mean, that's just kind of a game that this could turn out to be. But in the end, I'm going with the Hawkeyes to win this one 13-6. The main reason, what it kind of came down to for this game was looking at both sides of the ball for both teams. where is the strongest area, and I think the Iowa defense is the strongest side of the ball for both teams. I mean, Kentucky's defense is also good, but Iowa's better in both the pass and rush defense, especially the rush defense. They're better against the run. Kentucky has been somewhat vulnerable against the run this season. So I think Iowa wins this game 13-6. You'll probably see a defensive touchdown for the Hawkeyes. They'll probably get a touchdown there. Honestly, the only reason why this game would go over is if we saw multiple defensive touchdowns. I just don't think we're going to see more than 1 or 2 offensive touchdowns. We'll probably see a couple of field goals. I think Kentucky at least gets a couple of field goals on the board. But yeah, this one's going to be rough. I mean, I'm going with the Hawkeyes 13-6. I'm going to say 55% towards the Hawkeyes. This is obviously a rematch of last year's bowl matchup as well, and Kentucky did win that game. So I could see Iowa definitely winning it this year. Over-under 31. I'm taking the under for this one. The under easily. I honestly am pretty confident in that, and it's kind of crazy because the over-under is 31. But, I mean, the way that both offenses are, the injuries, Kentucky players going to the NFL draft, leaving early. I mean, this has all the makings to be a brutally low-scoring game, and I'm going to be going with Iowa 13-6. Let me know your thoughts and comments below on this matchup, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.